Hi, this is Ethan Whitrack with Instructional Technology, and I'm going to go over a couple of documents you might consider using for sake of creating a short documentary style type piece. This process could be used though for a lot of different types of video or audio podcasts, um, particularly in thinking about the pre-production, production, post-production, and distribution process uh, throughout the entire process. So during this beginning portion, if you're just starting to work on a project, knowing that every minute you spend in pre-production saves you 10 in post is probably not an exaggeration. And part of that pre-production planning is creating a proposal, a treatment to explain what you have in mind, the purpose of the piece, its intended audience. So this is the standard one that we often use for classes and for assignments that incorporate video types of projects or audio projects. And this includes what is the purpose of the piece, explaining what you're creating, and essentially why. Who is your audience? You'll hear people say that it's meant to be all things for all people. This is usually not a good way to focus your topic. You want to make sure that you're sort of aiming at a specific primary audience, and then maybe also thinking about a secondary audience as well. It's great if your piece finds a broader audience than that and is able to be widely shared and appreciated by general audiences. But in general, you want to target your piece at least with one or two primary and secondary audiences in mind. Describing the content of your video, so talking about what we're going to be seeing, what we're going to be hearing. The point of view, this one's, I think, helpful too to be thinking about maybe from like even a writing perspective. If your questions or if your script or if your focus is going to be on one specific angle, whether or not it can be interview focused or even narration focused, if you're doing a lot of research, for example, versus if you're collecting a lot of primary interview type resources. So those are things to give consideration to. What form will your video take? You'll be able to go through these, I think, and ask yourselves a lot of questions about what you want this piece to ultimately look like. I don't know that it's listed on here, but I think it's important also to give consideration to the format. So I talked about the purpose of the piece, the audience of the piece, and then often I would say that third primary question, if you weren't going to use this form, is to consider the format and distribution. So the format being maybe an MP4 video, full HD, 1080p, and we're going to share it on YouTube. The distribution process, that's our plan. We're going to send it on YouTube or maybe post it on Facebook as well. So those would be the first, I think, three questions to ask, but this form helps you kind of go through a little bit more in detail. Now, the next form I want to show you is a sample script. So here I have a sample version. Now the sample version here is really basic, but it shows the audio as it is written out, either the narration or music or sound effects, and spells out what we're expecting. The video, and that might include the expected B-roll, the images you might be capturing, interviews you might be capturing, and then short time stamps giving either reference to where we are in your timeline, like if it's a 5-minute piece, which second we're at, or in the case of this sample, how long, the duration of those specific clips. So you can use something like that as somewhat of a template for creating a more complex script. The type of script I like to make is often, because I rely usually heavily on interviews and I don't know what they're going to say ahead of time, is I like to often include almost like a chapter marker in reference to a theme or thematic kind of focus, so that if a portion is the introduction for the first 30 seconds of a piece, that next minute is to establish some of the history about a piece, the following minute is to talk about the here and now, the relevant as it pertains to what's going on to an event or to some set of current events. That final minute might be devoted to the future, looking ahead, thinking about what's coming next, and maybe a call to action for people to get involved or to do something about a topic. And then finally, a 30-second conclusion. That would give me, I think I'm doing my math right here, that would give me like a 4-minute piece, for example, with a beginning, middle, and end. And thinking about that on your script might help you also go back and edit just a portion of it or reappropriate certain clips to specific chapters or specific portions of your script. So consider that if you're looking for a fourth column to add to a script. I will send, well, at least in this collection of documents, I have the video script, and I also have a sample, or the sample script and the blank script if someone wanted to use that. Next beyond that is a shot list, which ends up acting like a grocery list of your content that you're going to be collecting, especially useful for collecting B-roll. Here you'll see our sample video production shot list. It's called the Benefits of Sellable Gardening, and it's got the total runtime, I think, at 1:13. Well, anyway, the shot list that's been created was created ahead of time, knowing what kind of content was going to need to be collected, but not preventing a videographer or a director who's on site from capturing additional content. This is meant to sort of be your baseline, meant to make sure that you at least get those establishing shots, you get those close-up shots of the content, that you get, if you know there's specific images that you want associated with this piece, that you have them written out ahead of time and expressing too the variation of shots. So here I've got locations spelled out, individual numbers for each of the scenes, but then frame. So you're seeing MS, LS, CU. That's a medium shot, a long shot, or a close-up. There's even an ECU, which would be extreme close-up. These would be ways to express to your camera operator what you're looking for. And especially with maybe, I'm thinking at the beginning of a piece about an event at some sort of conference, having that extreme wide shot or long shot to get a shot of the building or of the place to help ground us to understand like where we are at the beginning of this video, and then moving into things that might be a bit more intimate to the subject. So close-ups of things like if there's items involved, that you can see them up close. If there's people involved, often seeing people's faces in a closer medium shot, or even seeing their hands or seeing them working on something, can help create a more connection with your subject as you're watching a piece like that. And if all the shots are a medium shot from 6 feet up, looking with just a medium shot, it might get pretty boring to edit as well. You won't have as much content to sort of work with. All right, so then you also see the action. Video is a is a medium that relies on movement. So hopefully, even if you're using static shots, you're at least trying to capture movement as it's happening in the frame. That doesn't always mean panning or tilting, doesn't always mean zooming in and zooming out, but it can. And that's something that you might express in an action category, or at least expressing the desire to have like someone crossing through the frame or whatever it may be, so that you're capturing the action, not just, if you're a photographer, not just the subject. And then time. The rough rule of thumb with time for B-roll clips is try to capture 10 seconds of usable clip. So you might only use 3 seconds, you might only use 2 seconds. You could use a very short amount. But as a rule of thumb, the best suggestion is to record about 10 seconds, and that might involve counting in your head, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, so that you know that you're capturing about at least 5, ideally 10 seconds of usable B-roll for each of these grocery list items. And then notes can be a helpful way too to set those expectations with that camera operator, or for that matter, or videographer, or even with the director or whoever is on site, to know what was the rationale for why you wanted to capture that specific clip. So here it even has a small key. I've seen the key used with X instead of E, or use wide shot instead of long shot. It's a little bit of a jargon preference. Like I said, I've seen it done a few different ways there. And so with this, there's also the blank version of it. Additional columns could be added, or some could be taken away if needed, but that should hopefully be helpful as well. Final form that I have in this list would be the standard release form. So if you record someone, best practice is to get permission from them to use their image or to use their voice. for sake of a project that you're working on. Now, if you're recording a big group of people, you're not going to be obligated necessarily, especially if you're in a public location, you're not going to be obligated to go out and hand out those forms to like 50 different people. Hey, you're in a background shot in a public location. This is more appropriate for people that you've focused on. So an interview would be appropriate to fill out a form like this, even if it's a short interview. Then also, if you record someone in a medium or close-up shot, like they are the only focus in that video or that clip, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have them sign something like this too, even if they don't speak or have any sort of audio. The kicker here too, and fortunately we work at a college, so it's not as bad as in other locations, but if they are under the age of 18, they can't even give you formal permission. You actually need to seek it from a legal guardian. So that's something to consider. I think my rule of thumb would be to avoid, if at all possible, recording people under the age of 18, just to avoid this kind of headache. This is, I think, in many respects, a more sensitive point to which would prevent you from either posting a video or forcing you to go back and re-edit it to remove those images. So it's something too where you could do yourself a favor by avoiding the need to go re-edit or to pull a post down. So those are a quick synopsis of some of the basic production documents that I think are going to be useful to any video producer. So that's a treatment, which acts as a proposal, a script, which can be fluid, especially if you're relying heavily on interviews. Sometimes it's more appropriate to create the script even after you've shot some of those interviews, but that can somewhat be a discretionary choice. The third one was the shot list. The shot list acts as a grocery list of items that you're going to need to check off as you're capturing them as a videographer. And then finally, the standard release form, and that is for permissions, to make sure that you've secured permissions from the individuals that you've recorded, especially for interviews and especially for more intimate, close, focused shots that are focused on a single individual. If you're at a large event, if you're in a public location, and especially if you're shooting groups of people who are not under the age of 18, you most likely do not need to have this signed by most individuals. But if you are working with kids or individuals, this is something that you're going to want to have on hand and ready to use. Verbal permission is great, but maybe record it. Written permission is ideal, and if you can get it either in an email or with a form like this, that's considered best practice, but I'm not a lawyer. These kind of essentially boil down to almost like permission slips. So if you have any other questions about any of these production documents or other production documents, you can always reach out to me, Ethan Whitrock with Instructional Technology, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.